Sarah sighed contentedly as she added the final touches of watercolor to the whimsical forest scene she had illustrated for her latest children's book. She had always loved bringing imaginative worlds to life through her art. At 47 years old, Sarah was a successful freelance illustrator and author, having published over a dozen children's books over the past 2 decades. Glancing out the window of her home studio, she saw that the sun was beginning to set. Her husband John would be home from work soon. She tidied up her art supplies, secretly smiling to herself about the fat sum of money she had accumulated in a private bank account that John knew nothing about. Through illustration commissions and royalties from her book sales, Sarah had quietly amassed over $500,000 in savings. She heard the front door open as John arrived home. As he entered the kitchen looking exhausted, Sarah greeted him with a kiss on the cheek. "How was your day, hon?" she asked. John brushed past her silently and sat down at the kitchen table. Concerned by his odd behavior, Sarah sat across from him. John took a deep breath and said, "Sarah, we need to talk. This isn't working anymore. I've met someone else. I'm leaving you." Sarah froze in shock, feeling as though she had just been slapped in the face. What are you talking about?" she stammered. "Our marriage is over, Sarah," John said bluntly. "I've met someone who understands me, someone I'm meant to be with." Tears stung Sarah's eyes. "You can't just throw away our 18 years together." She cried out angrily. "I've given you my whole adult life. Does our marriage vow mean nothing to you?" John shook his head. "My mind's made up. I'll be contacting a divorce lawyer." He stood up from the table and walked out, leaving Sarah sobbing alone in the kitchen. Sarah's sadness quickly turned to fury. "How dare he betray me like this?" she thought. Impulsively, she considered revealing her secret savings account to show him just how self-sufficient she was. But no, she would keep that financial security for herself. Despite the crushing heartbreak, Sarah's creative mind began devising an intricate plan for revenge against her callous husband. 6 agonizing months had passed since John had abruptly left Sarah for Emily, her former best friend from childhood. The divorce was finalized with callous speed, the dissolution of their 18-year marriage reduced to signatures on legal documents. Sarah sat across from her friend Claire at a quiet cafe, half listening as Claire caught her up on neighborhood gossip. Then Claire mentioned the news that made Sarah's blood boil. "So John and Emily eloped in Hawaii last weekend," Claire revealed casually while stirring her tea. "I saw the photos on Facebook. It looked like a dream wedding right on the beach at sunset." Sarah's hand gripped her coffee cup tightly as outrage coursed through her. "They hardly even waited before getting married," she exclaimed, incensed. Claire nodded sympathetically. "I know, it's so tacky of them to flaunt it publicly like that," she agreed. "They couldn't be more insensitive to you and what you're going through." After the lunch, Sarah immediately called her old friend George, who had known both Emily and John when they were younger. George had proven a loyal confidant over the past painful months. "George, we have to do something about those 2 snakes," Sarah vented over the phone, recounting Claire's news about the elopement. "Wow, that's low even for those 2, George replied, disgust in his voice. "I never trusted Emily after what she did to you in high school. And clearly John has no integrity or spine." Sarah felt validated hearing George's anger toward her ex and former friend. "I say we find proof that John and Emily were already having an affair before our divorce," she plotted. "Then we can expose them for the cheaters they are." George paused, then answered carefully, "I still have some old contacts from our high school days. Let me discreetly ask around behind the scenes and see what I can dig up." "Perfect," Sarah responded, determination rising within her. She would not let John and Emily get away with betraying and humiliating her like this. The seeds of revenge now planted, Sarah felt emboldened and ready to make them pay. Over the next few months, George discreetly dug into John and Emily's past, determined to find definitive proof that they had been romantically involved while John was still married to Sarah. He tapped old high school friends he still kept in touch with, fishing for any clues about John and Emily's interactions over the years. He even managed to call in a favor with a friend who worked as a manager at the upscale Avalon Hotel downtown. Finally, George arranged to meet up with Sarah at their favorite local bar one evening. He arrived early and grabbed them a table. When Sarah arrived, he waved her over eagerly. "I've got something big," George said in a hushed tone as Sarah slid into the booth. "Go on," Sarah replied, her pulse quickening. George pulled out a bundle of stapled paperwork. "My friend at the Avalon got me copies of old guest registrations and receipts," he explained. "Take a look at this one." He handed her a registration from 5 years prior. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw both John and Emily's names listed for a single room, coinciding with a weekend Sarah had been out of town for work. "I knew it," Sarah exclaimed angrily. "Here's concrete proof they've been sneaking around behind my back for years." George nodded. "We've got them now. Should we anonymously send these records over to John's law office to expose him to his partners?" Sarah pondered the idea, then slowly shook her head. "No, my teenage daughter Emma still lives at home with John. I don't want this affair coming to light to blow up her life right now." George empathized with Sarah's concern for protecting her daughter, despite her fury at John. "Okay, we'll keep this evidence locked and loaded for the right moment," he assured her. "When Emma's an independent adult, we can detonate this affair bomb on John and Emily in spectacular fashion." Sarah smiled deviously, excited to have the power to destroy her ex-husband's reputation and marriage whenever she chose. The pieces of her revenge plot were slowly coming together. 2 agonizing years had passed since Sarah's life was upended by divorce. She had adjusted to her new normal, finding solace in her illustration work and time with her teenage daughter Emma. Then another bombshell struck. Sarah was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder requiring intensive, long-term hospitalization. During one visit from John and Emma, Sarah couldn't help but notice subtle mannerisms in her daughter that suddenly seemed unfamiliar. The way Emma laughed, her bright green eyes that mirrored John's hazel ones, realization crept over Sarah like a dark cloud. After chatting for a while, Sarah asked gently, "Emma, sweetie, could you give your father and me a moment alone?" Emma nodded obligingly and left the hospital room. Alone with John now, Sarah decided to confront her gnawing suspicion head-on. "John, is Emma actually your daughter with Emily?" she asked point-blank, eyes probing his guilt-stricken face. John turned pale and started sputtering. "Sarah, what on earth makes you say that?" Sarah pressed on. "I've had my doubts since the divorce. Her eyes, her laugh, they're Emily's." John vehemently shook his head. "You're completely mistaken and speaking out of exhaustion. Emma is your daughter, end of story." But deep in her bones, Sarah knew the truth of it. Emma was the product of John's illicit affair with Emily during their marriage, the ultimate betrayal. Despite this crushing revelation, Sarah resolved not to tell Emma anything. She would endure this secret alone rather than inflict pain onto her innocent daughter. For now, her focus had to be healing. There would be time later for revenge. Nearly a decade had passed since Sarah's life was torn apart by divorce and illness. Though she had physically recovered, the emotional scars still lingered from John's betrayal. Sarah had endured a painfully lonely decade, poured herself into raising Emma alone, now a thriving college sophomore. One morning, Sarah stopped into her usual coffee shop before work. As she waited for her latte, she heard a familiar voice behind her, John. Sarah's pulse quickened with anger as she turned to face him. "Sarah, you're looking well," John said awkwardly. Before she could respond, he hastily pulled out a business card and pressed it into her hand. "This is my divorce lawyer's information," John stated coldly. "I'm leaving Emily like I left you." Sarah stood in stunned silence as John walked briskly out of the shop. She sat down, hands shaking with renewed fury over his callousness. Later, she met her friend Claire for lunch and recounted the entire encounter. "Can you believe the absolute nerve of that man, after all these years?" Sarah vented. Claire shook her head in disgust. "John is clearly still the same selfish jerk he always was. I think you should finally expose him and Emily for what they did." Sarah realized Claire was right. The time for long overdue revenge had finally arrived. She called George that evening, and they met at the bar where they had first hatched their plan. "I'm ready to detonate this affair bomb and rip apart their lives like they did to ours," Sarah declared, new steel in her voice. With Emma grown, her career thriving, and John's second divorce imminent, Sarah would seize this opportunity fate had presented. The ugly truth would come to light, and justice would at last be served. With icy resolve, Sarah meticulously set her vengeance plan in motion. She retrieved the incriminating hotel registration records from years prior that proved John's adulterous weekend tryst with Emily while married to Sarah. Under the cloak of night, she made photocopies of the smoking gun evidence and mailed them anonymously to the senior partners at John's prestigious law firm, Fairfield and Associates. It took less than a week for the fallout. John was swiftly fired from the firm where he had dedicated over 2 decades of his career. The termination was callously impersonal, with John escorted out by security, personal items in a box. Across town, Emily was having her own crisis. She had been called into a disciplinary meeting with the superintendent about inappropriate Facebook photos of her and John tagged together during his marriage to Sarah. Emily realized with dawning horror that someone had discovered their secret long-ago affair. Emily arrived home panic-stricken, nearly hyperventilating. "John, someone found out about us," she cried out shrilly. "When this sordid affair comes fully to light, my reputation as a teacher will be utterly ruined." John sat on the sofa with his head cradled in his hands, the walls of his once idyllic life crumbling around him. "My career is already gone," he said dejectedly. "We'll have nothing left." While the embattled couple spiraled, Sarah was covertly preparing her boldest maneuver yet. She had managed to secretly purchase the sprawling mansion next door to John and Emily's stately home, with plans to move in immediately. She would relish a front-row view of the destruction she had wrought on the duplicitous lovers. On moving day, John stood slack-jawed in his driveway as Sarah directed the movers while chatting with their new neighbor. As the realization hit, John charged across the neatly manicured lawn separating their now adjacent properties. "Why the hell couldn't you just let this go and move on, Sarah?" John bellowed, face purple with rage. Sarah smiled serenely. "You and Emily chose to selfishly destroy me all those years ago," she replied coolly. "Now I've finally made us even." Surveying her new luxury estate and flourishing illustration career, Sarah felt financially and morally vindicated at long last. The cheating snakes had finally gotten their karmic comeuppance. In the months following Sarah's dramatic expose of the affair, the lives of all those involved were irrevocably shaken and altered. John found himself utterly broken, jobless, his reputation destroyed, divorced again. He descended into alcoholism and despair. One rainy night, in a drunken rage fueled by self-pity, John pounded on Sarah's front door. "I've lost everything because of you," he slurred, reeking of whiskey and stale cigarettes. "My career, my family, my dignity. You vindictive bitch. I'm a shell of a man now." Sarah stood resolute in her doorway, arms crossed. "You have no one to blame but yourself, John," she replied icily. "Now get off my porch before I call the police." Across town, Emily weathered her own spectacular downfall after the sordid details of the affair emerged publicly. She was swiftly fired from her long-held teaching position, her reputation left in ruins. Mortified over having her secret betrayed, Emily quickly sold her home at a loss and fled town, trying in vain to outrun scandal and shame. Heartbroken, Sarah's daughter Emma learned that the man who had raised her was not her biological father after all. Emily completely severed contact with the girl she once claimed to adore. Emma spiraled into depression, feeling betrayed by the only parents she had ever known. One tearful night, Sarah gathered Emma into her arms, gently stroking her hair. "John may not have been your biological dad, but he loved you, provided for you, and helped raise you into the amazing young woman you are," she soothed. "We cannot let anger at the past poison our future, sweetie." In the quiet aftermath, Sarah reflected deeply on the tumultuous events triggered by her revenge. Though she finally felt justified, she recognized the steep price paid in broken lives and relationships torn apart. True justice, Sarah realized, came from release, forgiveness instead of vengeance, compassion over retribution. This was the only path to lasting inner peace, however difficult.